Hello, my friends. Many people know that I'm a proponent of ancient wisdom in the context of relationships. Over the past several decades, much of society has adopted the belief that our technology and the availability of information somehow makes us wiser than those people who came before us. Needless to say, I believe that this is a mistake, particularly in the area of romantic relationships. In fact, today I was struck by something that I read which highlights a very important concept which has significant parallels within romantic relationships. So why is this so important? Well, I'd go so far as to say that a significant population of people in romantic relationships are particularly susceptible to the challenges highlighted in this passage. Unfortunately, these challenges often become the undoing of many relationships and also the reason why many attempts to reconcile will ultimately fail. However, the good news is that the passage also highlights the solution, which is simple, yet extremely powerful if applied. So if you're in a romantic relationship with someone, I think that it's well worth your time to consider the passage and the concepts that I'm about to share with you, as they can save you a ton of heartache now or in the future. The passage that I'm about to share with you comes from the Bible in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18. Now, I know that everyone has their own religious beliefs, and although this comes from Christianity, my intention isn't to push a religion, but rather to highlight a very important point that is applicable to romantic relationships. So regardless of your own spiritual or religious beliefs, I'd encourage you to listen with an open mind and an open heart. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. "O God, thank you that I'm not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I pay tithes on my whole income." But the tax collector stood off at a distance, and he wouldn't even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Jesus then told his listeners, "I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted." Now, after hearing this passage, you might ask, how does this passage about a Pharisee and a tax collector have anything at all to do with relationships? To explain this, I want to add some context. First, it's important to note that Pharisees in the time of Jesus were basically members of a social movement and philosophy, much like Republicans and Democrats. In the days of this passage, the Pharisees were considered the group which stood for and lived by what was believed as rightful living. They were upstanding citizens who were believed to be role models of what one should do and how one should live. In contrast, the tax collectors were often characterized as greedy, manipulating, dishonest people. It was common in those days for the tax collector to unjustly tax people so that they could skim a bit off the top for themselves. So in this story, we hear of a Pharisee going to temple and thanking God because he's not like one of those evil people out there. But conversely, we hear of a tax collector who wouldn't even raise his head to heaven as he knew his own acts were disgraceful. Yet, why would Jesus have said that the tax collector was justified and the Pharisee not? I mean, the Pharisee seemed to be doing what he believed and what others believed were rightful living, and the tax collector knew that he was failing in his moral responsibility, right? Well, the Pharisee made a couple of critical mistakes in our story. The first is judging himself against someone else. I believe that Ernest Hemingway captured this very accurately when he said that there is no nobility in being superior to your fellow man. True nobility is being superior to your former self. Was there a reason for the Pharisee to judge? No. Why did he do it? To feel justified, to bolster himself, to feel better, probably for his own misgivings that, well, he didn't mention a God. Judgment in any form is really the height of unconsciousness, because when we use our word against someone else, we're really just using it against ourselves. The Pharisee, though, made another error. Realize that the Pharisee made the conclusion that his actions were above reproach. But how could he possibly know this? We're all biased in our perceptions because everything that we experience is an interpretation of reality. It's not objective fact. So how did the Pharisee really know that he was perfect in every way? Clearly, we already know that he wasn't perfect in his judgment of another person. His judgment based upon his own relative opinion. And we already know that his judgment wasn't helpful to the other person, nor was it even helpful to himself. You see, in his piety, he failed to take accountability for his own failures. Okay, so how does this relate to our romantic relationships? First, I do want to say that I'm not any better than anyone else. I've made these mistakes and many more, and I've had to learn from them. It's from this place that I believe it's important to share the following concepts with you. You see, it's often the case in a romantic relationship that we come upon difficult times. Perhaps there are arguments, criticisms, disrespect, game playing, controlling behavior, infidelity, and all sorts of other challenges. When we find ourselves in these situations, it's very common to have the belief that the challenges are all the doing of our partners. We often seek out various examples of where they failed and where we believe we've been justified. We tell our friends and family members how our husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend is a psycho or a cheater or a narcissist. And maybe they have done some really bad things. However, it's so often the case that we take the position of the Pharisee, don't we? We become pious or holier than thou. However, we often overlook the splinter in our own eye, to borrow another phrase from the Bible. We share all of the ills of our partner and how if they would just change their behavior, everything would be fine. If they'd just be faithful, if they'd stop leaving the dishes in the sink, if they'd stop being insulting or demeaning or controlling, then our relationship would be perfect. Look, I'm not saying that your partner may not have done some very negative things. Certainly, if you find yourself hurting or in a position where your relationship has gone downhill, there's no question that your partner has a hand in it. Rather, what I am saying is that we often tend to overlook the fact that nothing in a relationship, and I mean nothing in a relationship, is the doing of only one partner. Yes, even if there's infidelity or contempt or criticism or whatever, you've had a hand in it. Both of you have. Some people might ask, well, my partner cheated on me. I didn't cheat, so how am I somehow at fault? The reason for this is because cheating and anything else happens for one reason and one reason only. Needs are not being met within the relationship. Period. This is a fact. No problem in a relationship is the creation of only one partner. Yet, sometimes we ignore this fact because it's too painful to accept that we've made mistakes as well. Maybe you were doing your own sort of controlling, perhaps using sex as a tool, perhaps only showing love and affection when you got your way. Perhaps you deliberately left the dishes in the sink because you were somehow going to get even. Perhaps you got all fancied up to go out with your friends to make your partner feel jealous. Perhaps you decided to prioritize your friends, family, coworkers, or kids over your partner or your relationship. Just as in our story, although we may believe that we're somehow spotless, the reality is that we're not. When we piously judge others and blame others for the challenges in our relationships, aren't we really just exalting ourselves? A relationship is a union of two people. If we're saying that all of the problems in our relationship have been caused by our partner, aren't we attempting to clear our name for any wrongdoing? Since we're asserting that we're blameless for our challenges, then we're exalting ourselves, aren't we? However, as I previously mentioned, we can never be completely blameless because by virtue of being in the relationship, we've had a hand in every problem, no matter how big or small. Sadly, in our judgment and in our piety, we also fail to realize that we carry around the negativity of judgment, non-forgiveness, and piousness, or piety, which is very clear for anyone else in the world to see. As our story highlights, we're humbled. To give you an example of this, consider, have you ever been on a first date with someone and they spend an hour telling you how their past partner was such a jerk or whatever? If you have, you know that this person has some issues to deal with and that they're not ready for a relationship with anyone. You'll also probably conclude that they've not taken accountability for their part of the relationship and they've resorted to bashing their previous partner, who at one point they said they loved. I know that I've been on dates like this, and that's why I only mention a first date, because personally, I wouldn't go on another date with them. Look, I know that I'm not perfect and that I make mistakes, so it's really inevitable that at some point I'm going to be bashed by them too, because they're bashing someone who they said they previously loved. How can I expect to be different? So they're humbled by not having second dates and by carrying around non-forgiveness, judgment, fear, anger, guilt, and sadness. Unfortunately, until they accept their faults and give forgiveness, they'll likely have very few second dates, and the people they'll attract are going to be vibrating to a very similar frequency. Like attracts like. So if all of this stuff is the case, then what do we do if we're not supposed to judge or piously believe that all of the problems that befall a romantic relationship are someone else's fault? Well, our story tells us that those who are humble will be exalted. Humility in a relationship is probably one of the most important things that you can ever do, because it puts you in a position to positively influence the relationship for the better. Conversely, if you're not in a relationship and you want to be in a relationship in the future, your humility will allow you to attract a like-minded individual who can give and receive love, because they'll sense that you can as well. Humility is truly a prerequisite for giving and receiving love, and so many people overlook it because it's not fashionable to our ego or to society. Sadly, it's our ego that often gets us into these relationship messes in the first place. Be humble. Know that you're not blameless. Accept accountability for the things that you've done wrong. Don't judge your partner or your ex-partner as bad or evil or a narcissist or anything else. Accept that you may not be compatible and that there's nothing wrong with this. If they do have mental or emotional challenges, rather than bash them, perhaps you should offer to help them. However, being humble doesn't mean being a pushover or a punching bag. You can only help someone so long before it's time to distance yourself from them. If it's not going to work out, be honest and tell them. Then do the right thing and leave the situation. But don't use your word against them. Humbly accept your wrongdoings and simply accept that you're not right for each other. As I've mentioned, I've made my share of mistakes in my relationships, and it's often tough to accept that I wasn't spotless. Yes, I've also been someone to say, it's all my partner's fault. However, eventually the day will come when you too will realize that you've had a hand in the issues as well. Trust me, it's infinitely better to accept this now so that you can really move forward without the judgment, negativity, non-forgiveness, and piety holding you back. Therefore, the most important advice that I can share with you today is to forgive, accept your wrongdoings, and humbly move forward. If this relationship that you're in is still in the cards for you, be humble with your partner. Be kind, forgiving, and work every day to become just a little bit better than you were the day before. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it's given you something to really consider and implement in your relationship starting today. This is Dr. Tom, reminding you to always live empowered on purpose.